Hey everybody, this video is going to talk about leash manners. It's an overview, so we're not going to get deep into talking about different techniques necessarily, but we're going to talk about kind of your perspective about leash manners and some general principles that apply to leash manners. So this video applies to anytime your dog is attached to you on a leash. So if you're doing tethering in the house, then this stuff applies to that. And also if you're outside the house on like a normal leashed walk, it applies to that as well. So why are leash manners so important? Because I think they're very important. Some people don't mind that their dog pulls them. Some people don't mind if their dog pulls them half the time, and then they just don't want their arm to be pulled off. But for me, loose leash walking is really, really important. And one of the main reasons for that is we've talked a lot in this program about the dynamic of your relationship with your dog, that there's a hierarchy, that the humans are the leaders. And so on the leashed walk or in the house with the leash on, you're constantly working on and establishing or undermining that dynamic. Depending on if your dog is pulling you, then they're kind of being the leader. They're kind of pulling you around. And if your dog is able to walk on a loose leash inside, outside the house, then you're more obviously the leader in that dynamic. It also builds your bond. So if your dog is disengaged from you and, when you're on the walk, they're doing their own thing, or when they're tethered, they're dragging you around the house, they're not really engaging with you. And so your relationship with them, your bond with them is also being undermined to an extent. They're bonding more with the squirrels on the walk rather than with you, if that makes sense. They're getting reinforcement more from the environment rather than from you. A third reason why leash manners are so important is because it reduces conflict. So whether you have a dog who's reactive or who's very fearful and insecure, or who wants to rambunctiously greet everyone, no matter what issues you have on the walk, working on leash manners is going to reduce all of that conflict. So it's going to make your dog more confident and more likely to more confident and more comfortable following you and trusting you. And if your dog is reactive, then working on leash manners when they're not being reactive is going to really reduce the reactivity. And if your dog, if your dog just kind of does their own thing on the walk, then working on leash manners is obviously going to help with the conflict between you guys. So there's innumerable reasons why leash manners are so important, and that's just some of them from my perspective. So let's talk about how to get them. Here is a pyramid that will show you how to get leash manners, how to get that beautiful heel. The purpose of putting this pyramid together is to just show you how much goes into leash manners. So I want to encourage you that if it's hard for you to get leash manners, that's normal. And a lot does go into it. So you're not going to get them right away. They're not going to be perfect right away, but we are going to work on as many of these elements that your dog needs in order to get you those nice leash manners. And not all dogs are going to need to focus on all the different elements, but this just breaks it down just to show you all that goes into it. So as you can see, leash manners are built on a foundation of engagement, and there's lots of different ways that we can work on engagement with your dog. You've probably already started some of them, and some of them are more complicated, like the engagement game. It's pretty fun, but it's an actual game that you set up, and some of them are a little more easy to do with less practice, and that would be like switchbacks or 180s. And yeah, so there's several different ways of building engagement, but that is just to point out that this is the foundation of leash manners. Engagement teaches your dog that you are interesting. So like the food chase game you can see on the pyramid is something that most of you won't be needing to use, but it's really good for dogs who are like really fixated on, like have a really, really high prey drive. So we can add in the food chase game, and what that does is it makes the human more interesting than chasing prey. It teaches your dog that you're worth paying attention to, because on the leash walk, a lot of times your dog is just at the end of the leash. That's how they know where you are. So they haven't lost you. They're aware of that. And they don't need to pay attention to you for any reason at all. So working on engagement teaches them that you're worth paying attention to, that you reinforce that paying attention to you is a good thing. And it reinforces your bond. So rather than the walk being about your dog all interacting with the environment or interacting with strangers, the walk is more about you guys bonding and building your relationship. So the next level on the pyramid is about skills, and you see there's a lot of different kinds of skills. Some of them are boundaries, like no forging. So that's where your dog is forging ahead, trying to get ahead of you all the time, trying to drag you down the street. That's more about boundary setting. And then there's things like there's some words on here. So teaching your dog the word back, teaching your dog the word flip, working on heel placement, working on them yielding to leash pressure. These are all different skills that we work on with your dog. And like I said, not all dogs are going to need all the skills, like every single one. But breaking it down into different pieces is really, really helpful, because it's the only way we're going to teach your dog. Because what we're doing is we're teaching your dog how to move their body and our expectations for their behavior. So if you teach your dog to move into heel position from 12 o'clock, like let's say you're in the middle of a clock and your dog, wherever your dog is, that's where they are on the clock, the face of the clock. So if you teach your dog to move into heel position from 12 o'clock, they won't necessarily know how to do it from 9 o'clock or from 2 o'clock. So we need to teach them from all those different positions how to move into the correct place in heel, because it's inevitable that they're going to get out of heel position. Having your dog walk in a really tight heel is as much work as it is for you as it is for them keeping the position and you reinforcing that that's where they should be. So we have to work on it from all these different angles. Also, when teaching different skills, the distance that they are away from you is really going to change how much they understand what you want them to do, which is go back into heel position, right? So if you're walking along and they get 6 inches ahead of you, that's different than if you're walking along and they get 2 feet ahead of you, which is different than if they're 10 feet ahead of you. So we need to practice how to move their body into the correct position from various distances as well as various angles. And also depends on what else is going on in the environment. We need to teach them how to do it when there's different distractions going on. So once we've done all that prep work, then we can put it together into a nice heel command. But yeah, you can see, looking at it broken down like this, you can see how building leash manners can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So I want to encourage you that if it's tough for you to get leash manners, don't worry. That's why you're in the training program. We're going to break it down so that you and your dog understand it and that you guys can walk nicely on a leash together for all those important reasons I listed at the beginning. And again, not all dogs will need to focus intently on all the different elements. Some dogs, like all training, some dogs just automatically get certain aspects. And some dogs got a lot of practice with certain things in puppyhood. So we don't necessarily need to work on all these different things with your dog, but we need to work on as many as we need to, and we need to work on them as much as we need to in order to get the nice leash manners. And like everything else in dog training, the 3Ds also apply to leash manners. So distance, distraction, and duration. Distance is getting your dog into position from a distance and from different angles. Distraction, it's when you're walking in novel environments, new environments. It's when other dogs and people are on the walk, or bicyclists, or even cars. And it's also random environmental stuff like squirrels. I guess the people in cars would count as environmental stuff too. Or like if you want to go on a walk with a friend or a walk with another dog, that's a really big distraction. And your dog's leash manners are going to change depending on those additional distractions on the walk. Also, duration. So you might not think about this as applying to leash manners, but just like holding a sit, putting your dog into heel position is different than walking with them for 2 steps and them maintaining heel position, right? I'm sure you've experienced that. You might get them walking next to you for a second, but then in no time they're out ahead again, or they're sniffing around or whatever. And it's also different from walking a mile and them maintaining a nice heel position. So duration also applies to practicing leash manners. So in the other videos, we're going to get into how to practice each of these elements as needed. So make sure that you're communicating with me about how it's going and what you've been working on and what's still coming up in the walk, because that's something that I need to assess in order to give you clearer instructions on what skill to focus on next. So I need to know, because all dogs are different, so I need to know when you practice the skills, how is your dog responding to that? And there's some basic principle. There's some basic, a lot of it applies to a lot of dogs, but there might be some specific stuff that we want to tweak for you guys, or specific things we want to add in for you guys, depending on what's going on. So make sure you are taking videos and telling me how it's going. And so I want to now talk about some basic rules about walking on leash. 1, no pressure on the leash ever. If there's pressure on the leash, it should be intentional. We're going to teach your dog how to take pressure off the leash. That's a thing you have to teach them. They don't know that that's a good thing to do. They don't know that that's something that we even want them to do. No matter how much we wish that they knew that, they have no clue. So we're going to teach them that. But keep in mind that there should be no pressure on the leash ever. The leash should always be slack. It's a communication problem. If your dog has pressure on the leash, then they're not paying attention to you. We want your dog paying attention, or I want, and I would encourage you to also want your dog to pay attention primarily to you, which is your body and your voice, not the physical restraint of the leash. I don't want them just trying to play or like trying to pay attention to the leash and ignoring the human on the end of the leash. So some dogs will try to pull you like a maniac, and that's obvious when that's happening, right? Like you can obviously tell that there's pressure on the leash. But sometimes there's this subtle thing that dogs do. Many dogs do this. So I just want to bring it up because your dog's probably going to do this. So when we're teaching leash manners, your dog will try to hang out just at the end of a slightly taut leash. So it's like, seems like the leash is slack enough, but it's like in their mind, they're actually watching the leash or paying attention to the leash. But to us, it might look like it is slack-ish, slightly slack. So if you're not sure if the leash is slack or taut, what I want you to do is give your dog a few more inches of leash and see what they do. So if they go to the end of the leash again and they're kind of bouncing there on that slightly taut leash, you know you need to work on that. But if you give them a little more slack and they're in the same spot and the leash is just more slack, they don't move really from that position, then you know they're watching your body and your voice and they're not just paying attention to the leash. So that's a good little test to see how well your dog is understanding to have no pressure on the leash ever, because it's very important and a basic rule. So the next rule about walking on the leash is whoever is the human on the end of the leash, they need to be the leader. Okay? So you're going to be working on that leadership dynamic. And what that means is you're going to choose the pace, how fast you walk. You're going to choose the direction that you walk in. You're going to choose who your dog gets to say hello to or not. And in the beginning, I would say don't let them say hi to anyone. That's the zen of dogs, of saying hello to a dog is you have to be able to pass the dog first, ignore the dog first, and then you can start saying hello to dogs. So that's just working on engagement, working on distractions, getting your dog to pay attention to you rather than trying to greet everybody. And so that's part of being a leader. So a lot of times people will say, like, their dog will see a person and then start pulling. And then the owner will be like, oh, he just wants to say hi. And then like let the dog drag them to go say hi. So we're not going to do that anymore. You get to choose who your dog gets to say hello to or not. And there's a whole routine that I like people to go through when they do allow their dog to say hello. And remember rule number 1, no pressure on the leash ever. So that routine does not include dragging you to say hi to people. As the leader, you also get to decide how long the walk is. So if your dog likes to drag you back to the house, or you turn to go back to the house and they want to walk further and you turn back around and keep walking, that's not you being a leader, right? So I want you to be the leader. You get to choose how long the walk is. You also get to choose when the walk starts. So sometimes folks, their dog is harassing them to take me on a walk, take me on a walk, take me on a walk. We're going to turn that on its head. And as the leader, you get to decide when the walk starts. And any other, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So any other aspect of the walk where there's any type of decision to be made, you're the leader. And so you get to make those decisions. Number 3, basic rules about walking on the leash. I want you to tell your dog when to start walking with you and when they can stop walking with you. So take a break means they can go ahead and do their own thing as long as they're not pulling. That still applies. So for when I want to tell a dog to start walking with me, I don't say, like, say they're in a sit and I want to start walking with them nicely next to me. If I tell them take a break, then that means they can go do whatever they want. So instead, I use let's go. During the phase where we're teaching leash manners, I use let's go, and that means basically to walk in a loose leash on either side. You choose what side they walk on, but it just means to walk in that nice loose heel position. And then once they know more leash skills, then I transition to using the word heel. But heel is kind of, as you saw, it was at the top of the pyramid. So heel is like an amalgamation of all those skills and engagement together. So if you don't have all that other stuff going on, then I would avoid using the word heel, and instead I use the word let's go. Related to that, related to telling your dog when to start walking with you and when they can stop walking with you, I want you to tell your dog when to potty. This is controversial for some people, just because of whatever ideas they have about how dogs potty, or like the entitlement that dogs have to go potty. But I actually like to teach or treat going to the bathroom the same as I do as like going out the front door. So I don't let my dog dart to go to the bathroom. Instead, I ask them to sit, and then I tell them to take a break. If they've been walking in a really nice heel for a period of time, then I might just go to the grassy patch and pause. And if they pause, then I'll tell them take a break. That's the same thing as with the doorway. The sit just makes it more clear. So it makes it more clear that there's a delineation between walking and pottying. Because again, we're trying to underline that you're the leader in the pack, you're the leader on the walk. And if your dog is allowed to just mark everywhere, pee on everything, or dart over into whatever grass they want to, then it's not going to, that's undermining that leadership dynamic. So yeah, instead I ask my dog to sit, and then I release them to go use the bathroom with take a break, and I don't allow any marking on the walk. If I'm in the walking portion of the walk, I'm just walking. I'm not going to pause and let them mark on stuff. If they try to mark on stuff, I just keep walking. So pick a couple spots on the walk where you can let your dog sniff around for a couple minutes. Again, they can't be pulling on the leash at that time, but they are allowed to sniff around, have the full length of the leash. If you use the same potty spots every time, that'll make it a little bit easier for your dog. It'll be more of a habit. So then the walking part will be easier because they know I don't sniff and pee on all this other stuff. So we're on our way to the potty spot. Of course, there is an exception for if there's an emergency, but especially starting out, most times when your dog says it's an emergency, they're going to be exaggerating. So don't necessarily, just because they dart over to sniff is not the same as if they dart over to poop, right? If they're pooping, if they just like dart over into the grass and just need to poop, then obviously let them poop. But if they like dart into the grass and then they're like taking their time sniffing around, okay, no, that's not an emergency. We're going to keep walking. So looking back at the pyramid, take each of these elements in the period, focus on them individually, and then we can pull it all together into a nice loose leash walk. Because like I said earlier, it's inevitable that your dog is going to get out of the heel position. And so we need to build skills that teaches them how to get back into the heel position, just so that you can actually get those leash manners that you're looking for. There's really no other way to do it. There's no shortcuts, in my opinion, for this type of stuff. So we're going to break it down into tiny pieces and work on everything separately and then bring it all together.